Hey everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel. This is be a video that was a long time coming. I just want to say that I'm actually back on my Yeti microphone. I don't know how the audio quality is going to come out. Hopefully it's good. I stopped using it because I blamed it for giving me a lisp, and uh, over time I realized that it's not the microphone's fault. And I'm gonna try to keep doing the microphone. I don't know how it's gonna work out. Maybe I'll do like a couple videos with this one and alternate. I'm gonna try to keep working on it and see if I can get that lisp to disappear, and we'll find out. It was annoying for me to rewatch the videos and yeah. Anyways, today I'm gonna do something called I'm gonna do a video focused on reporting. Primarily, it's gonna be around a question I get fairly often from clients, usually around like how do you know the database so well? How do you know where to go find things in a report? How do you just spit out a report really quickly? And a lot of it comes down to experience, for sure. A lot of it comes down to um, ensuring that, like I guess just memorizing the tables and column names that you're using as you just do the report over and over again, or the different types of reports over and over again. But there are some things that I follow. It's basically an 8-rule system that I use to identify where I need to go and what am I doing in the report. And I'm going to basically break them down for you in this video. And I guess you can kind of call it like troubleshooting your way through automation, or through troubleshooting your way through the Halo database. Automation, that was a speech I did for Roost a couple years ago. Now, this is troubleshooting your way through the Halo database. I am a huge troubleshooting person. I like critical thinking, problem solving. It's the only thing I really geek out about. And so I apply the concepts of troubleshooting and figuring things out to everything that I can. So with that being said, I'm going to flip over to my screen share. And if this works out properly, there we go. All right, so this is my Halo demo instance, like we have. And I basically created a article in this Halo called Troubleshooting Right Through HaloPSA, and it's got like the 8 rules that I follow when I do this. Now, most of the time, I don't use these rules every single time in order. I'm not a rule follower, I'm a rule breaker, but this is more or less what I follow through in various orders when I go to figure something out, if I don't remember where things are, if I don't know where things are because I haven't run into it yet. And so we're going to go through each of these rules one by one. Rule number 1, fault is a ticket. This is super important, and the rule is more than just this line. The specific part, what this means is that you have to remember the database we're talking about is from a very old platform. It's coming from the original Net Help Desk from over 25 years ago. The terminology in the database is very old, and it reflects the technical terms of its time. And so what that means is that when you're looking around the database and you're seeing something, if you notice a word or language that doesn't quite fit the context, but it kind of does if you twist the definition or if you think back again to the old legacy technical terms, it's probably what you're looking for. And there are other examples beyond just the word fault, which in Halo's case, a fault is a ticket. So another example is the word seriousness. That is priority. It's not quite the right vernacular, but that is the word that they use for the priority is going to be the seriousness or seriousness level and things like that. Another one is the word tree. A very old technical term of tree was used to refer to structure, organization, and things like that. And so in Halo's case, if you're looking at the tree table, you're gonna find departments, you're gonna find top levels, and things like that. Another use case is the word section, which is used to refer to teams inside of Halo. So again, just remembering, keeping that language transition from back then to today in mind as you go through, and if that language is not something you're familiar with or it's too old for you, I'm sorry. I was not around back then really, but I always played with stuff. And so I always was reading this old language stuff, and that's why I was able to do it. But essentially, you want to start thinking about what the definition of the words are and making links to what you're trying to do potentially and seeing if they match up. And so if it does, you kind of want to just poke at it, take a look, and see whether or not it's the right thing. So that's rule number one, is understand that the language that you're looking at in the database is going to be fairly old. There's another side to that as well before we move on to rule two, which is when you have a conflict because they're using a word that is also used as a keyword in SQL, they are going to replace it with an underscore, which is again is a fairly common technical technique used back in the old technical days. So you will see something like when as a date field, but instead of it being called date, or instead of it being called when, date is actually a when is actually a date field on the actions table, which we'll talk about in a moment. They replace the last letter with an underscore, so it's WHE underscore. And the same thing with the word section, which is referring to teams, because again, section is a SQL keyword, and so they can't really use that inside of a column name without causing problems. So instead they just replace the column name with an underscore instead. The other thing that we want to talk about next is the fact that action is a note or entry on a ticket. And so the important thing to know here and keep in mind is that when you have is that Halo is built to be aligned around ITIL practices, ITIL practices, right? So the whole concept there is that tickets have very structured processes to follow, and those processes are enforced through actions that you do on a ticket and outcomes from those actions. And so the key thing to know is that anything you're doing on a ticket is going to be inside the actions table. So that's going to be notes that happen, emails that come in, emails that go out, time entries that get added in, status changes, things like that. They're all logged as outcomes inside of the actions table. And then the final thing about that is, I don't remember what I was going to say next. Oh, if you remember that in Halo, everything is basically a ticket, what we mean by that is when it comes to projects and tasks and opportunities and tickets, they're all tickets. So everything is going to be contained from a ticketing perspective, either inside the faults table or inside the actions table. And there's not much more you need to know about that when it comes to reporting on tickets specifically. Okay. The next thing we want to talk about is understanding the table prefixes. And so for this, we're going to dive into the actual database. All right. So if we were to go to our Halo instance and we go to reporting, if we go do a new report, we can pull something like select star from area as an example. And if we notice that these column headers don't really mean anything, there's a bunch of A's. They don't really mean anything. It's very difficult to read if it's the first time I'm coming in to look at this database. I'm going to get confused. And if you notice, it's all around, right? There's A's everywhere. And so the key thing to know is that every table in the database has a name, obviously. Every column in those tables have a prefix that's based off the table name. And so if I look at something and I know I'm looking for a area, which is the very first column, A is the prefix referencing the area table. A is the area table prefix. And then area is going to be the identifier of that record in that table because it is literally the name of that table. And so that's the ID. All right. And we can see something similar like this if we go look at select star from site, maybe sites, I don't know. We have S site num, S description, or SDESC, S text, S glob X, whatever the heck that is, glob Y, right? So the same exact thing is occurring. We've got this S prefix that exists on every column in the table. We've got the site number, which is in this case the primary key or identifier of that site, as we can see. And then we also have, notice here, S area, which is going to be the client ID. Area is the client if we go back to the language thing that we didn't really give you more examples on. But area is a client, tree is department, top level, and section is team, right? We went through those. So if we're looking here, we can see this site is tied to this client, ID 1. We can see the description of the site is unknown. If we were to go to our customers and go to our clients and look at unknown, we're in client ID 1. And if we look at our sites, you'll see that we have a site called unknown here, right? And if we look at that site ID is 1. And if we go here, we can see that that site number is 1. right? And so if we take this and say, we know what, we're going to look at site number 2. I'm just going to change this site ID to 2, press enter. We're going to be inside this main site of Terry's Chocolate Corporate, which will be client ID 2. So if I go ahead and open up this client, we can see we're in client ID 2, right? So that's how that kind of works. Area is the client ID. We know that because it's in the area table. It's called area. It's the primary key of it. And it's S area in the site table because S is the prefix for site. And it's A area in the client table because A is the prefix for area. So going back to our rules for a second, we need to understand how the table prefixes work. And we can kind of use that to identify how much to skip when we're reading the names, and then suddenly everything makes so much more sense. So now we have the site number, we've got the description, we've got the text, right? Still don't know what these are, but we have style and client ID in use by memo, up who, again, I don't know what that means exactly, but you can kind of see how these up timestamp, right? Refer. I think these may be like updated potentially, and when they were last updated, maybe. I don't actually know. Here we got LDAP string, which doesn't have a prefix, so that prefix doesn't exist everywhere. Site email domain also doesn't have a prefix. It's not a global rule that applies across the board. It's just one that they try to do. Here we have S deliver by, so that is being used. S is invoice site. Again, this is telling you if that site is the invoice site or not. Right, so the same exact thing. Reference number, default delivery, seriousness level. Look at that. So now we've got the priority level brought in here. And again, we've got that prefix of S, right? So this is kind of how it works. And we can actually see this a little bit more in depth if we start looking at other tables, which we're going to do in a different way in a moment. So that's the understand table prefixes. And we also covered that knowing the primary key gets reused in every table. So I kind of already showed you in the site table how we have the S area, right? If we look at the users table for a moment, select start from users and hit preview report. So now we have use site, right? So this is going to be the site identifier inside the users table. We also have UID, which is going to be the ID number for the user in the users table, right? Now we do not have area, I don't think. Let's just make sure I'm not making that up. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, we don't have area here because what happens is the database knows there's a hierarchy in play that you kind of have to understand. There's a client first, sites go under the client, users go under that site. In the future update, we'll likely potentially have an area column added in or some other table to do a marriage because they're going to be allowing floating users, essentially, where you can assign a user directly to a client without having to be inside of a site. That's for later. We'll likely talk about it on by the run book or something like that. One of those the podcasts that the streaming cast that Connor and I do now. We do it every other week. It'll be on Tuesdays every other week. But in any case, following that same principle, if we were to take this and instead look at, let's say, the faults table for a moment. I don't know how long this will take to load. I probably did too many tickets. I don't really want to wait. I'm just going to duplicate this tab and see if we can just pull up like 5 tickets. Right, boom. Okay, so we have fault ID. Notice there's no real prefix on here, right? But we do, if we keep scrolling, in fact, most of these columns in the faults table don't really have a prefix, but we do actually have some of them that have prefixes. If we keep going far enough, you'll start seeing that. And this scroll bar is going to take not friendly to the size of my mouse, actually. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to pause that for a moment, and we're going to come back to the other primary keys. We know area is a primary key. So if I search for area, look at that. I have area integer, right? We know site is or site number. One of those two is a primary key. If I search for site number or integer, there, site number. Look at that, right? So we have now the site number is here as well. And so you can kind of understand, again, just looking through the table, you can start kind of piecing together. And this is why I call it troubleshooting your way, because you are basically figuring out which parts of the table is used to join other tables together so that you can basically build the report you're looking for. So that's site number, right? Let's see, there's also Let's see. There should be user ID or something like that. Uh, I actually don't know what it's got to be here. Hold on. User ID. There, boom, user ID, right? It's the same exact primary key. I'm glad I was able to prove myself right there because that would have been embarrassing. So over here we've got knowing that the primary key gets reused in every table. So if you know what the primary key is of one table, you can probably go find that value in another table using variations of the same word, either spelled out or abbreviated or something like that, depending on how long that column name is going to be, right? We can do this even more. If I change this from false to actions, for example, we can go back. I think my browser is acting up. Here, we've got actions. We can remove these. And here we have the full table. We've got who. Here's the when with the underscore I was pointing out. That's a date field when it was done. We have action number indicating that this is going to be, it's not quite a unique ID because it's actually only unique for that individual ticket, but we do have fault ID. It's the same exact primary key as the tickets. And there's actually also another column here that's used. I think it's action ID. I could be wrong. We'll come back to that in a moment because I want to get to the next part of this rule. Use the Halo reporting module for faster searching and learning of the database. What does that mean exactly? So as you saw me for the last couple of tables, I can scroll through here. I can use Control F to try to find column names that I'm looking for. It'll likely work to a certain extent and you'll make for sure progress. But it is so much faster to skip the preview first and look directly at the fields, especially if it's a lot of data you're pulling back. You don't need to load that data. You just need to pull up the schema of those fields. If you go to the fields and come here, you can use this to find what it is you're looking for. Like, boom, here's all action IDs, and I was wrong. Action ID doesn't exist on here yet. It may be like AID or something like that. I don't know if I'm pretty sure there's a column here that has a separate independent action ID, but I could be wrong. Action by unum, right? So we'll look at that in a moment. Who with, node HTML, a reply to address. You can basically scroll through here and find a list of fields that you want to use and reference as long as it makes sense for what you're looking for. So like outcome ID, right? There's also act outcome, right? So act is going to be the prefix here, essentially. And if we look at act by itself, we can see we've got act process ID is a prefix. We've got act is billable, act is ready for processing, act reviewed, act process state, that's action, a charge total action, right? So for the most part, you can kind of see all these rules coming into play now, and these columns should start making sense to you in terms of how they work. All right, so let's move on to the next step. Well, let me go back and show you some other tables now that we looked at previously before. So if we're looking at area, for example, we come here to fields and we can use this to identify what are the fields that exist on the client table, right? And how many are, like, what can we do to search for, like, description will usually be name. If you know that, right, then you can basically search DESC in every table you're looking at and pull back, you know, what it is you're looking for. Another one we'll go into is if we change this to item instead, then we're looking at the items table, and we can kind of see here the same thing. IID, so I is going to be the prefix, ID is the ID, I status, I generic, I note, I description, 2, 3, etc. Right? Quantity in stock, quantity on order, you know, goods in unit, goods out unit, right? In out conversion, and so on and so forth. Quantity issued this year, base price created by, and so on. So again, using the same rules, we can basically map that across. Let me see if I can show you the same thing in a different structure. So I don't know if we have any of the quotes or invoices available. We got plenty of quotes. Okay, perfect. So let's go look at the quotation header, which is again like fairly old, or like it's not really old language, but let's call it old language in this case. It maybe just be UK, some strangeness, I don't know. But if you look here, we've got this prefix of QH ID, QH fault ID, right? Now we see the ticket number. And in fact, if we look for item, we can see we've got, actually item doesn't exist because we're looking at the header. So what we need to do is look at the details. Everything we see here, there's only going to be one line per quote, right? And what's going to happen is that these are going to be the metadata of the quote itself. If we pull up, for example, one of these quotes, let's say we've got this one for $6,000 or so, right? So we've got 5 laptops coming out here. This is quote number 15. If I go back and I add where QH is my prefix, ID, because that's the primary key, equals 15, and I get back this report, this quote specifically 2183-1, and if we look here, we can see it's 2183-1. So that is the exact quote we're looking for. Now we want to get kind of like, here's the new laptops required. We want to get the lines of that quote. Where are the lines, right? So if we change this and instead pull select top 5 from quotation detail, right? We have now a different prefix of QD. We have QD description, which is the line item specifically. And if we actually look, we notice we have QD, QHID, right? It's this exact same primary key from the other table. So we can now do the following. We can do from quotation header, join join quotation detail on QD, QHID is equal to QHID, where QHID is equal to whatever that number was, 15, right? And that'll give us back the quote number, but it'll also give us back the line item. That's the title. Hold on one second. Keep going. Tim Bowers, all the way, QH, here we go. Here's the line item. QD start date, QD billing period, right? Because now it's joined at this point. And if I go and add, you know what? I know that I'm looking for the description of the line item. So let's say I want the quote number, so let's pull in the reference number. I want to know the item, so I'll put in the description. And I want to know the quantity, and I want to know, like, let's say price. Okay. And now I've got, here's the quote number, a laptop, right? If I want to know the item, I can come back here and I'm probably going to find something QD item ID, right? Which is literally the IID. It's the item ID that's here. So it's the exact same thing. We can pull the ticket number, we can pull the date if we want to. And then if we pull this up, we can see that we've got the item ID is 9. And so if I go back to this quote and double click on this laptop, it's going to take us to the item of 9, right? So we can kind of see like how it all plays out. And this is using the reporting module for faster learning and searching the database. Instead of pulling up the data and exploring the data directly, you don't need to look at the data necessarily yet to be able to find what you need to see, right? Based off of every other rule we've just learned, the first 4 rules we learned, we can find what we're looking for using just the fields filter. Okay. And then comes the next big piece. So 5, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 was like a big overall rule. Like all of them together is a significant help. But the next biggest help you're going to get, right? We haven't talked about the community schema. We haven't talked about the schema on the website or anything like that. And we're probably not going to necessarily. But the next biggest thing we're going to look at is going to be to use the existing reports that have information you're looking for, or pieces of information you're looking for, to find out how they're getting it. And so if I go back to my reporting and I go to the online repository, I'm going to do a search for, I don't know, average time to respond to assigned incidents, right? So we've got a summary here, date created, month created. I want to see how they're getting this month, because I don't know if that exists in the database directly. I know I have date created, but where the heck is this month coming from? I'm just going to right click on this report and I'm going to open the report data source. Okay. By doing that, even though it's in the marketplace, it's in the online repository, I haven't installed it yet in my library, I can still right click and view the data source, and it's going to show me that it's converting varchar 7, it's a specific format date filter, of false date occurred to the value of 120. All right, so this is going to be convert to date. Here's the date value. Here's the format of the date to convert to, and it's doing that as month created. So now I can copy this and use it in whatever report I want. That can be something as complicated as give me this category breakdown, give me the month created, give me the month closed, let me see how it's assigned to, how you're doing that, right? So you can basically use the reporting, the existing reports from the online repository, even if it doesn't have the exact report you want. You can open up the data source, identify what you want to pull, and then use that in your report. Here's a perfect example based off priority, right? So we want to pull up the priority here. We've got fault seriousness 1, whether or not it's excluded from SLA, and then as priority 1, right? So this is going to be if this and that. If it's serious equals 1 and exclude from SLA is 0, then output 1. Otherwise, output 0. So it's only outputting a value for each column, priority 1, 2, 3, based off of the ticket not being excluded from SLA and the priority being 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So those are the columns, and that's how it's going to work. We can see kind of how all this works. SLA response time remaining is being calculated here. We can pull that in if we want to on our reports, and we can use this to basically build pieces of our own report. So again, that rule number 6, I think, is utilize the open report data source to learn how other reports are doing it. That right-click open report data source is magic, and it's going to be something that you're going to want to use over and over again. Here's the abandoned live chats that you can do, and so on and so forth. So just by seeing those reports, you don't need the exact query there, but it kind of gives you the idea of like what tables to look at for some of the things you're looking for. As long as a version or the data is touched by another report that you can find, you can easily identify what's doing that, and then you can pull it in for yourself. The next line is 7, right? So this is not as magical as number 6, but it's still fairly helpful. At this point, if you're pulling this up, you're kind of getting desperate. I come and refer back to this table, to this report, primarily because I forgot the name of a table. It's something I've already known or looked at and played with, but I forgot the name of it. Or I don't know it at all. And if I don't know it at all, I'm already desperate at that point, and I'm reaching the end of how we're going to figure it out. Okay, so this report is fairly simple. We're going to go into our reporting module. We're going to pull this up. There is probably a space somewhere. You know what? I'm just going to call it search for schema. Here, database tables and calls. That's why it's the ampersand, right? So this may or may not already be inside of our instance. It looks like it is, right? Notice how quick that was to load. The reason why it loaded so fast is because there's a filter included that exists in our library. If I come here and pull this up, notice we have a filter already. If we do not have a filter, do not try to use the report. If it's the first time you're opening it up and there's no filter on the report, what's going to happen is the report is going to go so slow. It's going to pull literally every single row from the table. It looks like, hey guys, new feature that just came out. They've started paginating the results of the report, which means that it's way faster than it used to be. So now that they've paginated it, it used to load all the records in one screen and the browser would crash when you tried doing anything with it. Now it looks like they're paginating, so it's not as bad, but you still want to add a filter here. Filter for the table name, because now you can use this table name drop down to search for tables that you think may be relevant. I want to search for anything to do with tickets. Look at this. Here's all my fault database tables, right? And I can see, look, here's my related faults, and here's a list of columns that exist inside of that table. I can say I want to search for how clients are mapped to Azure tenants, right? So boom, here's Azure, or here's area. Here are all my client tables, and here's the area Azure tenant. And then you can kind of see these are the column names that exist, right? If I were looking at these column names, how would I know which one's referring to the client ID? Well, that's easy. It's got area ID right here. If I were to use my other rules that I just covered, this is going to be what table I look at. This is going to be the column I use to link back to the client's table. And the same thing applies in every other table that you're going to go through, right? So with that in mind, this report is super helpful. It is useful, but if you have to get to this report, it's because you don't remember the name of the table, or you're just starting out and you're basically already desperate at this point. So you're really going to have to read through and start identifying how things work. The tables are not that big if you scroll through them, especially if you're doing it at like midnight and you're trying to fall asleep. It's a great way to fall asleep. But you can kind of search here using this drop down to say, I want to pull up like, what are items? Where are my items, right? So here's all my things that have the word item. If I want to see like assets, I can search for asset. There's not that many of them. where are assets likely to be? Well, another word for asset, especially back in the day, was device. And look at that, we now have a device table. If I go and look at my assets over here, that's the wrong thing. If I click on my assets up here and see if I have any assets, I've got a bunch, got about, what, 16 assets. If I go back to a brand new report and I just hit the new button, and I'm just gonna select star from device, lo and behold, I should have, well, 59. There's probably some that are inactive. No, oh, sorry, I'm not in all. Here, all assets, there we go. 59 assets total, and then the report shows 59 here, right? And so you can kind of see where the things play out, okay? Which brings us to the next, last, and final rule that exists. What do we do if we need to find a field on a table and nothing we've done up until now has helped? We think we know what the table is, we kind of know where it's going, we may or may not know the column name, but we really can't be sure. The easiest thing to do in this case is to follow rule number 8, which is use a real entity and a real value to find the corresponding column name by pulling the entire entity into report. So for example, I don't know which column I can use to reference this asset tag value from a report, but I do know that the asset is device, and I know that this ID is 7. And so if I come here and I can look at my fields and I can guess that DID is probably going to be the number of the device. So I can come in and say, select star from device where DID equals 7, right? And now I've got this one device that comes back. All right, now what are the chances that this is the right device? Well, I can see my site number is 18. So if I pull this up and I look at the site I'm looking at, sure enough, it's site ID 18. Okay, well, I have this serial number, MAC address, whatever this is. It's probably MAC address. If I copy this and I come back to my data, I can control F and find, how would I ever guess that this is INVNO, right? I can tell you how you'd guess, because it stands for inventory number. And the asset tag is the inventory number of the device, right? So again, going back to that whole language thing coming into play, there's no way you'd be able to guess that column name if you didn't already know what it stood for. But if you know the value of what's inside of what you're looking for, you can still pull the entire device, the entire entity, search for that value, and then go find it at that point from the reporting side. Keeping in mind that you don't need to have something that you'd recognize necessarily already set. If you know, like, could be the value is 1 potentially, and you can't necessarily put your own arbitrary value in there, but you can change it from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, right? And so what you can do is you identify on the ticket what the current value is, then you change it. So you go from 1 to 2, let's say, and then you just search the ticket for what that new value should be, because you changed it. It could be another ticket number, right? So another example I'm going to show you real quick, just so you can get that point across, is over here, right? I have this ticket number. I'm going to link this ticket to another ticket. So we're just going to pull a random ticket here, and now we can see it's linked over here. Where exactly is the reference of this parent ID in the ticket? So I know this ticket number is 2354. If I go to my report, and I'm just going to build a new report real quick, and I pull select star from faults, where fault ID is equal to this ticket number, how do I know? And I can go to my fields and I can search all I want for, like, parent. Okay, that's not really it. Child, that's definitely not it, right? Doesn't help me. Where in this report can I find this parent, right? So even if I didn't have a parent, even if I didn't need to have a parent, but I need it in general, I can build a ticket. I can temporarily link it through. I can grab this number, and I can just control F and find it. Look at that. FXREF2. XREF is a cross reference to F is the prefix of the table. And so using the language trick, the understanding of how old, the hierarchy, the whole database structure, how it's built and designed, you can use these rules to start tracking your way through the database and build your own reports without relying on Halo support or making sure that the online repository reports that you get are accurate for your system. Hopefully this was helpful to you. Hopefully it was interesting. And if you have any questions or comments, of course, leave them below and I'll try to get back to you. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day.